Hello, once again, nurses. Once again, this is Doc A. And for today, we're going to discuss and talk about the care of clients with respiratory disorders. So basically, we're going to discuss and talk about different respiratory disorders and the managements and things that we can do as nurses. Okay, so first on our list is the deviated septum. Okay, so when we talk about deviated septum, obviously there is a deflection of the normally straight nasal septum. So usually our nasal septum is straight. However, for this one, the septum is bent on one side or altering, or it could be bented on one side that results to the altering of the air passages. So possible etiology why we could be able to experience that is first trauma. Second, it could be secondary to congenital disproportion. So usually it happens in which the size of the septum is proportional to the size of our nose. So that's the normal thing. Okay. So for our signs and symptoms, so obviously, since it is bent on one side, so it could cause one obstruction on the nasal breathing. It could also increase the possibility of nasal edema. It could also result to dryness of the nasal mucosa with some crusting or even bleeding, especially because if ever the nasal mucosa is dry, usually it could cause crusting, and later on it could lead to bleeding or epistaxis. Okay, so what are the management? What are the things that we can do? Um, First, if it is secondary to allergic rhinitis. So we need to do some nasal allergy control. So meaning to say that as much as possible, we need to minimize the possibility that they would have a nasal allergy. So another thing, since it is already bented, so what we need to do is to properly align the deviated septum, and it could be done through surgery, and we call that surgery as nasal septoplasty. Okay, so again, the surgery is nasal septoplasty. So basically, we are going to reconstruct again the nasal septum to properly align it. Okay. So the next one of the common respiratory disorders that we have is the nasal fracture. Here on this slide, we could see the fracture on the nose. Here, if you can see the bone, there's a line that we could be able to visualize, and that is the fracture. So usually, it is caused by substantial blow on the middle of the face. So most likely, it is secondary to facial trauma. Okay. Um, so who usually have this? So aside from those people who are involved in brawling, people who are really into sports could also experience nasal fracture. So for us to be able to prevent it, it is a must to use protective sports equipment. Okay, so that they could be able to protect their facial structures. So if ever people who has nasal fracture, most likely they could be able to experience some complications like airway obstruction. It could lead to epistaxis and even septal hematoma. So when we talk about nasal fracture, it could be unilateral, but it could also be bilateral. So when we talk about unilateral, only one side of the nose is affected. So bilateral, both sides. So sometimes the bilateral nasal fracture is also called or quoted as complex nasal fracture. So the unilateral nasal fracture usually produces little to no displacement. However, if that is a bilateral nasal fracture, which is more common, so we could see that there is a flattened look on the nose. Just to think of that there is a blow on your nose, so most likely it will flatten. Okay? So since sometimes it could be coded as complex. So complex nasal fracture involve subsequent damage. Okay, meaning to say it's not only the nasal area that is affected. Sometimes other adjacent facial structures are also involved. So if that happens, so it is coded as complex nasal fracture. So what are those adjacent facial structures that could be affected with complex nasal fracture? So for example, it also affects the teeth, eyes, and even other facial bones. So for our signs and symptoms for nasal fracture, so usually they could be able to experience epistaxis, okay, or bleeding and on the nasal area. Later on, it could lead to hematoma. Okay, so next is there is an obvious facial deformity, just like what I have stated a while ago. Most likely your face will be flattened. Okay. Next, there will be edema. Okay, and lastly, it could also produce some ecchymosis, especially on the eye area. Okay, so sometimes the ecchymosis also happens at the eye area. That's why sometimes people with nasal fracture and even zygomatic bone fracture are called to have raccoon's eyes. Okay. So for our nursing responsibility, if ever we have patients with nasal fracture, it is a must for us to inspect the nose of the patient and make sure to check whether there are some fluid that are coming from the nose itself. Okay, because if there are clear drainage or clear fluid coming out of the nose, it could indicate CSF leakage or cerebrospinal fluid leakage. So again, if the clear drainage is present, what we need to do is to test that clear drainage, okay? What are we going to do for testing? We need to test for presence of glucose because if they are positive for glucose, it means that the fluid coming out from their nose are CSF or cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? So for our management, so basically what we need to do for management is we need to maintain patent airway. So most likely what we need to do is to keep the patient on upright position. Okay? We need to place the bed on semi-fallers or high fallers position. Or we need to place the patient on sitting position, but it needs to be comfortable. Next, aside from maintaining patent airway, the next thing to do is for us to reduce the edema because, of course, if the area is edematous plus there is already a blockage, so it could lead to difficulty of breathing later on. So what can we do for us to reduce the edema? We could apply ice pack on the face and the nose so that we could be able to reduce the edema and it could also control the possible bleeding. Okay? Next thing that we can do is to prevent further complications. So basically, the possible complications for nasal fracture are bleeding or epistaxis and infection. Okay, so just like what I have stated, if we are going to put an ice pack, we could not only control the edema, but we could also control the bleeding. So for inspection, make sure that the things that we are using, we were able to cleanse the area with aseptic solutions. Okay. Next thing that we can do is to provide emotional support. Why do you think emotional support is a must? Is needed? Basically, there will be some changes on their appearance because the affected area is the face. So with that, most likely they might be thinking not only the pain that they are experiencing, but the look, how they look. Okay? So for us to be able to at least reconstruct again the face. So they could have some open reduction. Okay, so for operations, they could have septoplasty if it only affects the nasal septum. Again, they're just going to realign the nasal septum. However, they could also do some rhinoplasty. So the reconstruction of the whole nose. Okay, so those things, may it be septoplasty or rhinoplasty, they are being done to realign the fracture and to assure that the septal hematoma will not develop into infection. Okay, so again, when we talk about rhinoplasty, so that is the surgical reconstruction of our nose. So it is usually performed for cosmetic reasons. Okay, however, for this specific case, yes, we are doing that for cosmetic reason. However, aside from that, we are also doing that to improve airway functions. Okay? So next one in our list is epistaxis. So that is bleeding of the nose. So there is blood coming out or gushing from our nostrils. Okay. So possible etiology of epistaxis. One, it could be secondary to trauma. Okay, maybe someone were able to punch you on your face. So it could be um one of the possible etiology. So it is caused by trauma. Second, it can be caused by hypertension. So if you have a very high blood pressure, it is also common for patients with rheumatic heart disease and even those who have problems from their nose like cancers. Okay. So for our nursing responsibilities, usually when we were still young, what we usually do is we are asked to tilt our chin upward, okay, then pinch our nose, okay. However, that specific thing that we are doing before might just increase the risk for us to experience aspiration. Okay? So if ever there's someone who are experiencing epistaxis, what we need to do is to let them sit up. Okay, so just like what I'm doing, so I'm sitting up. Okay, then we ask them to lean forward. Okay, then the head is tipped to prevent aspiration. So usually we're asking them to tilt it, okay, downward. Okay, then after that, pressure are being put at the soft tissue of the nose like this. And it is done for at least 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. So aside from that, we could also put cold compress or ice pack over the nose so that it will promote vasoconstriction. Okay, sometimes in some areas they're using nasal pack with neosep sorry with neosenephrine. Okay, so we're using nasal pack with neosenephrine. So it's like nosed with epinephrine. Okay. So Neosephrine. Okay. And usually they're doing that for around 3 to 5 days. Okay. So aside from those things, we could also put the patient on liquid diet. Okay. Then later on, they could have soft diet so that it will be easier for them to swallow. Okay. Rather than giving them foods that they really need to chew. Another thing, what we can do is to avoid oral temperature taking. Okay. So if we're going to get the body temperature, so do not use the oral route, and tell them not to blow their nose for 2 days after the removal of the nasal pack so that it will prevent the possibility of rebleeding. Okay? And lastly, we could also tell them to notify the physician if ever the epistaxis is recurrent, meaning to say it goes every now and then. Okay? So, because if the patient is usually experiencing epistaxis, it might indicate presence of possible serious problems like hypertension, like rheumatic heart disease, and even cancer. Okay? So next one that we're going to discuss is sinusitis. So when we talk about sinusitis, so itis means inflammation, right? So what is inflamed? The sinuses. Here at this slide, what we can see is the difference between a healthy sinus and those persons with a sinusitis. Okay. So, possible etiology of our sinusitis is if you have a URTI or upper respiratory tract infection. So there's a big possibility that you will experience sinusitis. So next one, if you're a cigarette smoker. So if you continuously or usually experiencing allergic rhinitis. Okay, why? Because allergic rhinitis could lead to inflammation, and this inflammation could lead to edema on the mucous membranes. Okay, and when there is an edema on the mucous membrane, it will result to hypersecretion of mucus. Okay, and we know if there are already a hypersecretion of mucus, so it could be a very good medium for the growth of bacteria, viruses, and even fungi. Okay, and because of that, it could lead to infection. Okay, so as what we can see on our slide, sinusitis is an inflammation or swelling of the tissue lining of our sinuses. So we have the usual sinuses that we have is the frontal sinus, the sphenoid sinus, ethmoid, and the maxillary sinus. Okay? So these sinuses are a group of four paired air-filled spaces that are surround the nasal cavity. So for possible signs and symptoms, you could experience facial pain. Okay, usually if the affected site is the maxillary sinus, so there will be pain on the cheeks, okay, and on the upper teeth. If the problem area is the frontal sinus, so you could experience pain on above the eyebrows. If it is on ethmoid, so usually the pain is around the eyes. And if that is sphenoid, so the pain is usually behind the eyes and the occiput and even at the top of the head. Okay. So aside from facial pain, you could also experience headache and body malaise. You could also experience nasal mucus. Okay, so meaning to say that there are post-nasal drip, you feel that there's something coming out from your nose every now and then. Okay. You could also experience plugged nose or stuffy nose, meaning to say that you feel that there's something obstructing in your nose. Okay. And sometimes you could also have fever, and usually if you have sinusitis, you could also experience persistent cough. Okay. So for nursing responsibilities and management, so what we can do is to provide bed rest for our patient. Okay, we need to instruct them to increase oral fluid intake so that it will help liquefying those mucuses, excess mucus. Okay. Next, we could also give warm packs. Okay. If for epistaxis, what we are giving is cold packs. For sinusitis, what we are giving are warm packs. Okay. Um, Aside from that, make sure not to give aspirin. Okay. But instead, we could give codeine. So medications with codeine, because aspirin increases the possibility or the risk of developing nasal polyps. Okay. Aside from codeine, they could also be given some antibiotics like amoxicillin. Okay. Usually, if that is acute phase, it is given around 7 to 10 days. However, for chronic, it could be given for as long as 11 to 21 days. But again, it depends upon the doctor's prescription. Okay. We could also give some nasal decongestants. Okay. Like Dimetap. Okay. Like Sudafed and other nasal decongestants that we have in and we can buy it over the counter. So usually, if you're going to use Dimetap, Sudafed, it is used up to 72 hours, okay, or 3 days. Another thing that we can do is to irrigate, okay, to irrigate the sinuses. Well, actually, when we talk about irrigation of sinuses, usually what we can only irrigate is the maxillary sinus, okay? So you just need to have a syringe, put a warm normal saline solution there, and you need to flush the nose using the syringe. Of course, take off the needle. Just use the barrel of the syringe, put an amount of warm normal saline solution, and you can irrigate the maxillary sinus. Okay. Aside from those things, they could also have some surgery. So for surgery, what they could have is the functional endoscopic sinus surgery. So usually it is called as Caldwell-Lute surgery. So Caldwell, Caldwell, then dash LUT. So that's Caldwell-Lute surgery. Sometimes it is also called as radical antrum surgery. Okay, so if ever the patient will be undergoing this, we need to tell that they need not to chew on the affected side. Okay. Um, we also need to tell them to be cautious in terms of oral hygiene, just to prevent a trauma on the incision site. And tell them if they have dentures not to wear their dentures for around 10 days. Okay. We also need to instruct them if they undergone a surgery, this Caldwell-Lute surgery, not to blow their nose for around 2 weeks after the removal of the packing, and avoid sneezing for 2 weeks after surgery. Okay. Another possible surgery, so it depends upon the area which sinus needs to be removed. So Of course, if that is the ethmoid sinus, so it is called as ethmoidectomy. So if that is the sphenoid sinus, so it could be called as sphenoidectomy. Okay. And sometimes for the frontal sinus, we call the surgery as flap surgery. Flap as in FLAP surgery. Okay. So next, we have the adenoids and tonsils. Okay. So the next one that we have is the adenitis. Okay. And tonsillitis. So basically, we just have the same signs and symptoms and the same management. The only difference is where does the inflammation happens. Is it at the adenoid or at the tonsil level? So you could see the difference of the placement in terms of the photo that we have. Okay? So the common signs and symptoms. So again, adenitis and tonsillitis. So it is the inflammation of the adenoids or the inflammation of the tonsils. Okay. So for our signs and symptoms, so they could experience sore throat. They could experience fever. Usually, if they have tonsillitis and adenoiditis, so they are snoring. Okay, They snores a lot. Okay, they could experience dysphagia. Okay, most of them are mouth breather. Okay, they could also complain of earache. They could experience colds, bronchitis, foul breath. Okay. There could also be some voice impairment. And when it comes to their respiration, so it could be noisy at times. Okay. So for our nursing intervention, we just need to put them on bed rest. We need to instruct them on increasing oral fluid intake. And for their oral hygiene, aside from the usual thing that they are doing, we could also ask them to do warm saline gargling. Okay. Um, we could give analgesics, okay, as ordered to minimize the pain that they might be experiencing. They could also be given some antibiotics, so antimicrobial. Okay, so again, it is per order. And of course, they could have surgery. So removal of the tonsils is tonsillectomy. Removal of the adenoid is adenoidectomy. Okay, so yeah. However, if ever this is your first time experiencing tonsillitis, for example, um, tonsillectomy is not being recommended. However, if it is recurring, for example, once a year you were able to experience 6 times of this, so that is the right time, or that is the cue that you really need to undergo tonsillectomy or adenoidectomy. Okay? So some intervention, some responsibility that we need to do if the patient are for surgery, specifically for this two. So we need to assess the patient if they have upper respiratory tract infection, if they are coughing, if they are sneezing. Okay, because those things, coughing, sneezing, post-operatively may cause some bleeding on our patient. Okay? So meaning to say, as much as possible, there should be no URTI. Okay? So aside from that, it is also a must to check the prothrombin time of our patient. Okay, basically, just to limit the possible complication of bleeding after the operation. So post-operative care, so things that we need to do after the operation. So we need to position the patient on prone position. Okay, then the head is on the side, or if not prone position and the head on the side, on one side, we could also place the patient on lateral position. Okay, if they are awake, we could put them in a semi-follows position. However, they need to tilt their head on one side. Okay, so oral airway um needs to be assessed. Okay. In terms of swallowing, so swallowing is only started once the gag reflex is already there, it already returned. Okay. We also need to monitor the possibility of hemorrhage. So, what are the warning signs, red flags, okay, that might suggest that the patient is experiencing hemorrhage? If they are post adenoidectomy or post tonsillectomy, so one is frequent swallowing, okay, because there are buildup of blood already on our throat or on their throat, so they keep on swallowing. So that is one of the red flag. It might suggest that there is hemorrhage. Okay. Another thing, if they are vomiting and the color of the vomitus is bright red vomitus. Okay. What else? If there is increased pulse rate, okay, we need also to be alarmed of that. So aside from those things, we also need to promote comfort among our patients. So in terms of comfort, we could give analgesic like acetaminophen. Okay. Again, do not give aspirin because aspirin could cause bleeding. Okay. We could also put an ice collar. Okay. Yeah. What else? We could also offer cold drinks and foods. What do I mean? For example, we could offer some ice cold fluids. Okay. We could offer ice chips. Okay. And in terms of food, make sure that that is bland diet. Okay. So some health teachings that we can give for them. So tell them to avoid clearing their throat. Okay, like so they cannot do that. Avoid doing that because it might cause bleeding. Next, avoid coughing, avoid sneezing, avoid blowing of nose for 1 to 2 weeks. Another thing, 2 to 3 liters of fluid per day, okay, might be instructed to them because drinking 2 to 3 fluids or liters of fluids daily will help manage the mouth odor. So next, tell them to avoid um, hard and scratchy foods, okay? Because it might irritate their throat. So they could only have hard foods or scratchy foods once their throat are already healed. So tell them to report any signs and symptoms of bleeding. So if they experience throat discomfort between 4 to 8 days after the operation, tell that it is normal. Okay, that happens because of the mucous membrane at the operative site. Okay. What else? In terms of having black or dark colored stool or feces for few days, tell them that it could be normal because they are swallowing blood. Okay, remember there are blood building up on their throat, so they are swallowing blood, and that might cause black to tarry or dark colored stool. Okay. What else? Instruct them to have plenty of rest, okay, for the next 2 weeks. And avoid going to crowded places, okay, because crowded places they might catch respiratory tract infections, so they need to avoid that. They need to avoid going to cold places, because maybe even that is not a crowded place, but because the area is too cold for them, they might have upper respiratory tract infection. And we need to avoid those things because those things could cause bleeding. Okay, next one on our list, we have atelectasis. So when we talk about atelectasis, basically it is lung collapse. Okay, it is lung collapse, atelectasis. So atelectasis is reversible collapse of a lobe. So it could happen on one lobe, okay? Or it could happen on one lung. Okay? So basically what happened for atelectasis, it starts with blockage on our airway, or sometimes it could be secondary to the compression that's happening. Okay, so just like what we can see on our slide. Okay, if ever we have a hint that the patient has atelectasis, but we're not yet sure, what we need to remember is to still treat the patient as if, or consider the patient that they already have lung collapse, so that we will be more cautious, and we will be looking forward into helping the patient. So possible etiology of atelectasis, one, it could be trauma. Okay. More second is, yeah, the lung compression. Okay. So usually if there is trauma, it could lead to lung compression, and with that, our lungs will not expand much. Okay, so if that happens, so yeah, it could lead to atelectasis. So other things, other possible etiology is it could be secondary to bronchospasm. Okay, sometimes tumor also could lead to airway obstruction, and because of that there will be decrease of oxygen going inside our body. So and later on it will result to decreased production of surfactant. So and because of that it will result to hypoventilation, and it is said that if there is a progressive or recurrent hypoventilation, so it could lead to atelectasis later on. Okay, so what are the signs and symptoms of atelectasis? So our patient could be restless. Okay. Usually, being restless is the early sign of hypoxia. Okay. So if the patient is starting to be restless, it might be a sign that the patient is already experiencing hypoxia. So aside from being restless, they could also experience some pain. Okay. The pain usually can be felt um on the area where the lung collapse happened. Okay. They could also experience tachypnea. So usually there are shallow breathing, and this happens because of the obstruction on the alveoli. They could also experience tachycardia. So if you will notice, there's already tachypnea and tachycardia. So it might lead to further complication and problems later on. So aside from that, during percussion, um, instead of the common resonance that we were able to hear on the lung field area, it will be dull. Okay, so um, during auscultation, there will be absence of the bronchial breathing. So, and possible during auscultation, instead of having the normal bronchial breath sounds, what we could hear are crackles or other adventitious breath sounds. Okay. So common nursing diagnosis for patients who have who experience atelectasis. One, there could be an impaired gas exchange. Okay, usually this happens because um, we are um, exhaling more carbon dioxide rather than inhaling oxygen. Okay, another possible nursing diagnosis aside from impaired gas exchange is we have pain, obviously, because that is one of the things that they might experience. And another possible nursing diagnosis is fear because of the signs and symptoms that they are experiencing. So most likely they might also feel that it might be their last chance. Okay. So for our nursing interventions, so first, what we need to do if ever the patient has atelectasis is to relieve the hypoxia. Okay. So in doing so, what we need to do is frequent respiratory assessment. Okay, we also need to do and perform respiratory hygiene measures, meaning to say we need to tell them to do deep breathing exercises, or they could also do some coughing exercises. Okay, we're doing those things to promote lung expansion. Okay, so aside from the respiratory hygiene measures, like the one that I've told you, deep breathing exercises and coughing exercises, we could also check and assess them using a spirometry, wherein we're going to ask them to blow on that, okay, so that we could measure, okay, the inhalation of our patient. Okay, usually we're doing that every hour so that we could be able to monitor the patient. So aside from that, we could also maintain oxygen inhalation. So put the patient or attach the patient in oxygen. Okay. We could also position the patient on the unaffected side. Okay. And put them on high Fowler's position or semi Fowler's position as long as the head um is higher as compared to the other parts of the body. So that will do. So aside from relieving hypoxia, another thing that we need to do is for us to prevent possible complications. So with that, we could give medications like antibiotics or any antimicrobial as ordered. Okay. We could also tell them and encourage them to do ambulation, to walk bit by bit and do the deep breathing exercises, because ambulation and deep breathing exercises like coughing exercise will promote lung expansion. Okay, and we could also tell them to increase oral intake, so oral fluid intake. So for our health teachings for these patients, tell them to report at once if they were able to experience any other signs and symptoms. Okay, if there's something unusual that they are experiencing, so they need to report it at once. Okay, so once again, um, reiterate to them the importance of doing deep breathing exercises, coughing exercises, and even ambulation so that it will help promote lung expansion. Okay, so moving forward, we have pulmonary edema. Okay, so for our pulmonary edema, well, actually, pulmonary edema, as what we can see on our slide, there is a buildup of fluid in the interstitial space of our lungs, where in fact, aside from the surfactant, there should be no other fluid that should be present. Aside, of course, from our blood, okay, and the surfactant, there's no other fluid that needs to be in our our lungs, basically. Okay, so having a pulmonary edema, it could be really fatal. Okay, so usually pulmonary edema happens because of the overhydration or overaccumulation of fluid in the interstitial space of our lungs. So for the classical sign or the pathognomonic sign of pulmonary edema, usually what we can see on patients with experiencing pulmonary edema is that they are excreting a pink frothy sputum. Okay? So sometimes we will notice that they are giving or spitting saliva. We thought saliva, but the sputum per se is pink and frothy. Okay? So usually in pulmonary edema, there is sudden transudation of fluid from the pulmonary capillaries going to the alveoli. So what happens on pulmonary edema? So first, once there is already the buildup of fluid on our interstitial spaces, it will increase the pulmonary capillary permeability. Okay, and because of that, it will result in increase in the hydrostatic pressure. That will lead to the decrease of blood colloidal osmotic pressure. So once that happened, so there will be a fluid accumulation in our alveoli, and because of that, instead of gas, okay, there's already a fluid. So meaning to say there will be a decreased diffusion of gases. So because of that, it will lead to hypoxia. Okay. So for our signs and symptoms, usually patients with pulmonary edema might experience fear. They could also experience anxiety because they don't know what's happening to them, but they feel that there's something bothering them. Okay. So just like a while ago, they could have the early sign of hypoxia. So once again, what's the earliest sign of hypoxia? Yes, that's correct. That's restlessness. Okay. So aside from that, they might verbalize that they fear something. Okay. Because they started to experience dyspnea. They could experience orthopnea. They could experience fatigue. Plus, there will be tachycardia. Okay. They will turn pale. Upon auscultation, positive for crackles and for wheezing. They could also experience diaphoresis. Okay, so they might be sweating a lot. Okay, and um, they might start to spit out the pink frothy sputum. They could also experience um, the signs and symptoms of heart failure. Okay, so always remember since the heart has the right and the left side, okay, if that is left-sided heart failure, always remember that the affected area or the signs and symptoms that we will notice are on the lungs. Okay? Meaning to say, they might experience dyspnea, there are abnormal breath sounds. Okay? However, if the affected area is the right, okay, the right side of the heart. So usually the symptoms are more systemic. Okay, it could lead to edema, specifically peripheral edema. There could be some weight gain. Okay, there could be a distension of the jugular vein. Okay. So in terms of nursing intervention for pulmonary edema, so I think first we need to relieve the patient's anxiety because once it is relieved, most likely they will relax more. Okay, so what can we do to relieve their anxiety? First, we can give medications as ordered, like morphine sulfate. So morphine sulfate could relax the patient, and it also can be used as a pain medication. Another thing that we can do is to be with the patient. We need to stay with the client so that they will feel that there's someone there to support them and to assist them with their needs. Next, we could also encourage them to verbalize their feelings. Okay, because with that, it will lessen how they feel, the depth of what they feel. We could also encourage them to do deep breathing exercises, and of course to have rest periods. So basically, in doing deep breathing exercises, we could be able to help them also to relax themselves. So aside from that, since part of it is the heart could also be affected, so another nursing intervention will be focused on improving the cardiac function. So in doing so, we could hook the patient in oxygen inhalation. Okay. So next, um, we could also, since we're hooking them with oxygen inhalation, for example, we're using nasal cannula. So we could use a water-based lubricant just to minimize the irritation on the nostril. Okay, especially if um, they are already using the nasal cannula for 5 days and more. So there's a very big tendency that it will be irritated. So we could apply water-based lubricant on that. Um, Aside from that, we could also give aminophylline. So aminophylline is a medication that will increase the cardiac outflow. Okay, for the IV fluids, we could give D5 water. We could also position the patient on high Fowler's position. If they are complaining of chest pain, we could also give nitroglycerin to remove the chest pain. Sometimes digitalis could also be given to them. In terms of their diet, they could have low salt, low fat, and diet, and we could also increase their oral fluid intake. So, since there are accumulation of fluid on the interstitial spaces, we also need to drain those. So by using um, diuretics, so we could give diuretics as ordered. So some health teachings, we need to tell them to be compliant in terms of the medication. Okay. We could also provide rest periods, so let them rest most of the time. Tell them to be on a strict diet. So again, low salt diet, and what else? By the way, I a while ago I've told you to have an increased oral fluid intake. Sorry for that. That should be decreased oral fluid intake since there are already fluid accumulation. And lastly, we could also tell them to report any um, complications that they might be experiencing, especially if it already affects their cardiac functioning. So any signs and symptoms that pertains with the heart failure that we were able to discuss a while ago, may it be right or left, so they need to report it at once. Okay? So moving forward, we have a pulmonary embolism. So for pulmonary embolism, so there is blockage in the pulmonary artery. So it could be on the main pulmonary artery or it could be on the branches. So usually the blockage is caused of an embolus. Okay, so they could be blood clot, it could be tumor, fragments of fats, or even air that originates from somewhere else in our body. So when we deal about pulmonary embolism, so pulmonary embolism is undissolved mass. Okay, it happens because there is undissolved mass that travels in the bloodstream. Then afterward, it will occlude on the blood vessel. So with that, it will result to obstruction of blood flow going to our lungs. Okay, so sometimes they could experience thrombophlebitis. So it could be secondary, so etiology of pulmonary embolism, it could be because of thrombophlebitis, it could be because of um, surgery before, okay? It could be secondary to obesity. Usually, if you're obese, you have high cholesterol levels, so it could also be a precursor of having pulmonary embolism. So um, because of those things, because of those etiology, most likely there will be increase in the pressure on the pulmonary artery or even in the reflex constriction of our pulmonary blood vessel. So because of that, there will be decrease on the pulmonary circulation, and because there is limited circulation in the lungs, so it could lead to pulmonary infarction. Okay. So some of the signs and symptoms that we have for pulmonary embolism, they could complain of chest pain. Usually it is substernal pain here. Okay. And the type of pain that they are experiencing, they usually describe it as crushing, sharp, stabbing. Okay, type of pains. And aside from that, they could also complain of sudden onset of dyspnea. Okay, then they become restless. Again, when we talk about restlessness, that's an early sign of hypoxia. So in terms of body temperature, it could also be affected. So usually, if you have pulmonary embolism, it will result to hypothermia. Okay. Upon auscultation, there could be crackles, and the patient could experience shock later on. So meaning to say, again, when we talk about shock, the signs that we need to look out is hypotactac. So there could be hypotension, tachycardia, and tachypnea. So common nursing diagnosis for our pulmonary embolism. So of course there could be pain, there could be ineffective breathing pattern, and impaired gas exchange. So in terms of our nursing intervention, so one of the few things that we need to do first is to assess and monitor the patient. Okay, so we need to auscultate the patient. Usually, if the patient has pulmonary embolism, there is decrease to absent breath sounds. Okay, what we could do if ever these things happen, is to elevate the head of the bed. So to make sure that their head is higher, okay, than other parts of the body. We could also monitor their ABG, okay. We can also monitor the oxygen saturation and even the blood coagulation. So meaning to say that we need to monitor the prothrombin time. Okay, so if ever there's a problem, okay, it's too fast, it's too quick, so we could be able to give anticoagulant. Kasi usually, if they have passed prothrombin time, it means that their blood easily clots. So that's why we need to give anticoagulant as per ordered. Okay. So aside from that, we could also encourage the patient for ambulation. And if ever they could undergo a surgery wherein we need to take off the embolus or the emboli that's there. Okay. And we call that as embolectomy. Okay. Embolectomy. So removal of the embolism. So aside from those things that we need to do, we need to give them further teaching, especially on things on how to prevent further occurrences of pulmonary embolism. We need to instruct them about the importance of using um, an embolic stockings. Um, if they are female, so we can tell them to avoid use of birth control pills because basically birth control pills would increase the pulmonary embolism. Okay, and always tell them to take their medication regularly, to adhere on the treatment regimen, and to make a follow-up care and follow-up checkups. Okay? So other things that we need to check um, here is we could also check the voice sounds of our patients. So remember what we have discussed on previous discussion, the egophony, the lung consolidation, the whispered pectoriloquy, what else? How do we auscultate the lungs? So basically, we need to assess all those things for patients with pulmonary embolism. Okay. So next up, we have our pleural effusion. So um, when we talk about pleural effusion or pneumothorax, so sometimes it is called as pneumothorax. Okay, well actually it depends upon what type of substance is in there. Okay, so basically when we talk about pleural effusion, it is the accumulation of either air or fluid on the pleural spaces. Okay. Okay, so just like what you can see here on our slide, so if that is fluid, so we call it as hydrothorax. If that is blood, so we call it as hemothorax. If that is air, so that's pneumothorax, okay? And so on and so forth. So possible etiology, why pleural effusion or pneumothorax happens. So it could be secondary to trauma. If they had, for example, that a vehicular accident that result to a rupture, so it could lead to pneumothorax or pleural effusion. It could be secondary to thoracic surgery. Okay, so meaning to say that along the way, usually when we talk about the lungs, it should be on negative pressure, but along the way, it becomes to have a positive pressure ventilation. So it will result to this problem. Usually it might happen during thoracentesis if you hit the wrong one, okay? So it could be that. It could be secondary to central venous pressure line insertion. Okay, and it could also be secondary to emphysema. So for our signs and symptoms, usually if you have pleural effusion or pneumothorax, one of the most common um, signs and symptoms is difficulty of breathing. They could hardly breathe. They could complain of dyspnea. So you could also notice that there is a shortness of breath. They could complain of sudden sharp chest pain. They are restless. Again, when they are restless, it suggests that they're starting to have hypoxia. So they could experience tachycardia, tachypnea, okay, and there could be presence to decrease number of breath sounds, and later on it could be absent, okay, because of lung consolidation. They could complain of chest tightness. There could be chest asymmetry. Okay, just like what we can see on our slide. So one lung is bigger as compared to the other one. Okay, so there could be also a deviation on the larynx and trachea. Usually, it moves towards the unaffected side because it is more expanded. It has more air on it. So yeah, it's moving towards the unaffected side. So there could be cyanosis, and during percussion on the area with problem, it will give us it's either tympanic or it could be dull sound during the percussions. Okay, so what management can we give and can we do for patients with pleural effusion and pneumothorax? First, we ourselves, we need to stay calm. Okay, okay, and because if we are calm, the patient will also be calm. Okay, aside from that, we need to stay with our patient. So we need to position the patient on Fowler's position. We could give pain medication so we can have pain management because that's one of the most common complaint of these patients. We could give medications as being ordered by the physician. So it could be pain medication. Okay, so we could also instruct them to do deep breathing exercises and coughing exercises to promote lung re-expansion. Of course, since they have dyspnea, they have difficulty of breathing, so we could give them oxygen therapy. Okay. Aside from that, we also need to drain the area. So with that, they could have chest tube drainage. Okay, it could be one bottle system, two bottle system, or three bottle systems. It really depends. Aside from that, we could monitor the lung expansion and the amount of the accumulated substance there through chest x-ray, so we could be able to monitor the lungs. Okay, we could have ABG monitoring, and of course, monitor the patient for any signs and symptoms of shock. So again, what are the easiest thing for us to pinpoint that the patient might be on shock or will be experiencing shock? Okay, so that is correct. They might manifest hypotac-tac, okay? Hypotension, tachycardia, and tachypnea. Okay, so with that, we need to monitor their vital signs. Okay, so next one is the COPD. So COPD is known as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Okay, so sometimes it is also called as chronic airflow limitation. Okay, so COPD is a combination of three respiratory disorders. So we have emphysema, we have chronic bronchitis, and even asthma. So basically, when we talk about COPD, it is the combination of those three disorders. Again, we have emphysema, chronic bronchitis, and asthma. Okay? So first stop we have asthma. So for asthma, usually asthma is characterized by the wheezing sound. So if you're going to hear them breathe, we can be able to hear wheezing sound. Okay. So what could be the etiology of asthma? Okay. So maybe you're asking why there's a wheezing sound. If you will notice, this is our tubes wherein air are flowing. So normal on a normal patients on a normal person, it is big. For those patients with asthma, there's a blockage on it. But during asthma attack, the the airflow is really tight. Okay, that's why it produces the wheezing sound. Okay, so for our etiology, so usually um it is attributed to allergy. Okay. So usually that's one of the main reason, allergy, due to the irritation of the allergens. So usually it could be secondary to dust collecting things. Okay. So it could be a precursor. So next, um, we could have some extrinsic factors that might cause. Okay, so something that is outside our body, outside our system. So just like dust collecting things, okay, pollution, um, strenuous activities. So those are some extrinsic factors that might cause asthma. However, there's also an intrinsic one, which is within us. Okay, if ever it's hereditary, if we already have infection, respiratory infection, it could also trigger asthma. Okay, so what happens for patients with asthma? So usually there's an inflammation. So this inflammation is a result of the increase in bradykinins, increase in histamine, prostaglandin, serotonins, and even leukotrienes. Okay, so because of those things, because of the inflammation, so it will increase the possibility of bronchospasm. So if there is bronchospasm, so meaning that our tubules, the bronchus, are starting to be constricted. Okay? So, and because of that, edema on the mucous membrane will happen. So, usually there will be hypersecretions on the mucus, okay, because of the edema. And because of all of those things happening, it will result on the narrowing of our airway. Since the airway is already narrow, it will result to the wheezing sound. And later, it will increase the respiratory rate of the patient due to the bronchoconstriction. That's why there is wheezing sound and there is a tachypnea. Okay, so aside from those things, other signs and symptoms that they could experience, they could have experienced restlessness, okay, which is a sign of hypoxia. Okay, usually they wanted to be on upright position or top neck position. So they want to be on this position as much as possible because that is the most comfortable for them. So there is dyspnea, okay, because of the tachypnea. There could be tachycardia, and we will notice that they are also using their accessory muscles during breathing. Okay, they could also be cold and clammy because of the anxiety that they are experiencing because they are experiencing dyspnea. Okay, aside from that, the diaphoresis could be present. They will turn into pallor But later on, because of the lack of oxygenated blood, lack of oxygen in the body, they could be cyanotic. So usually the attack is quite long. So there will be a possibility of exhaustion, okay, because of too many minutes of hard breathing. Okay, what else? They could also experience hypoventilation, and they could also have hypercarbia. Hypercarbia, when we talk about hypercarbia, there is increased carbon dioxide in the body. So we know if there's increased carbon dioxide in the body, we have less oxygen. Okay? Less oxygen in the body. So meaning to say there is hypoxia. And lastly, they could also experience respiratory acidosis. Okay. So for the management and treatment, well, actually for management and treatment, we are going to discuss them all in one, because they are all under COPD. Okay. So aside from asthma, we have chronic bronchitis and emphysema. I always tell my students that usually if you have chronic bronchitis, you are on the bigger side as compared to those who have emphysema, as you can see on our slide. And another thing, chronic bronchitis is also known as a blue bloater. So they are commonly cyanotic and look bloated or overweight. Okay, while emphysema, usually they look like, they are also called as pink puffers, because they are pinkish in color. However, they are having trouble into um breathing. They have severe dyspnea. Okay? But still, even though they are experiencing those things, they still like um to smoke cigarette. Okay? So if we're going to discuss them one by one, let's start with chronic bronchitis. Okay? So for chronic bronchitis, since chronic, it's more than 6 months of having productive cough, okay, and there's already an inflammation on the bronchial tubes, and because of that, mucus are present. So just like what I have told you a while ago, chronic bronchitis is also known as blue bloaters, because they are cyanotic and they are overweight, and it is prone, or cigarette smokers are prone to have chronic bronchitis. Okay, however, when we talk about cigarette smoking, it's not only the first hand. Okay, you could be the second hand smoker, meaning to say that you're not smoking, however, you are with people who are smoking while they are smoking. So basically, you're also inhaling the smoke. Okay, so it makes you a second-hand smoker. And we also have third-hand smokers. So those are people who are not present while you are smoking, but since particles and substances are already on your skin, on your clothes. When you go home, for example, you hug your nieces, your son, your daughters, or whoever, they could sniff onto those substances, and that makes them third-hand smokers. Okay? So, possible etiology of chronic bronchitis, obviously, cigarette smokers, those patients with respiratory tract infections. Chronic bronchitis could be secondary to environmental pollutants. Okay. So because of that, because of the pollution, so it only means that all of us are also prone for chronic bronchitis, not only because of smoking. So as a result, the bronchioles becomes inflamed. Okay? And because of that, it will cause the increase of bradykinins, histamines, prostaglandin. Okay, so if there is increase on prostaglandin, it means that the patient will experience pain. That is why one of the common signs of chronic bronchitis is chest pain. Okay, so increase on the bradykinins, the prostaglandin, the histamine will result to increased capillary permeability. Okay, and because of that, it will lead to cellular exudation. Okay, And when we already have the cellular exudation, it will lead to edema on the mucous membrane, and later on it will result to um, hypersecretions of mucus. And since there are hypersecretions of mucus already, so it will result to persistent cough. So you will be coughing and coughing. Okay, so that is for the chronic bronchitis. So next one, we have the emphysema. So emphysema is a chronic obstructive lung disease. So basically COPD is already been attributed to emphysema. So which is characterized by alveolar damage. So you will see here the how a normal alveoli looks like with an alveoli who are already damaged because of emphysema. So again, it is called also called emphysema is also called as pink puffers. Okay, usually the destruction of our alveoli, the damage happens on the alveoli, happens because of over distension of the alveoli. Okay. However, even though it's overly distended, it's still not collapsed. So it's not yet collapsing. So it's not atelectasis yet. Okay. It's still emphysema. It's the alveoli is already over distended, but it is still there and it's not collapsing. Okay. So common thing that we could notice for patients with emphysema is barrel chest. So that is common among them. Okay, so etiology of emphysema. So just like chronic bronchitis, it is common among patients who are smokers. It could be secondary to heredity and aging process. So what happens for emphysema? So basically, there is this equilibrium in our elastase and our anti-elastase. So the elastase and anti-elastase are responsible in the elasticity of our alveoli. Okay? So if we have produced a lot of elastase, okay, so the anti-elastase are going to have a hard time to bring back the alveoli to its normal structure. Okay. With that, the elasticity and the recall power of alveoli is starting to diminish, to be distracted. Okay. So meaning to say that from being emptied out to being distended, so the alveoli becomes fixed. Okay? And it is fixed and inflated in an over-distended um, position or structure. So because of that, carbon dioxide retention happens that lead to hypercarbia. Okay? So of course, again, when we talk about hypercarbia, there is increased level of carbon dioxide in our body, in our blood. And with that, it means that the oxygen level is scarce or limited or decreased. Okay. So aside from that, patients could also experience respiratory acidosis. Okay. So for signs and symptoms of emphysema, um, so barrel chested is very common. Another common sign is coughing. Okay, but not really productive. Unlike with the chronic bronchitis, for chronic bronchitis, they have productive cough. Here, they're coughing. Okay, there is tachypnea because of dyspnea that they are experiencing. They could also have cyanosis later on, chest pain because of the increased production of prostaglandin. Um, Later on, they could also develop productive cough because of the hypersecretions of mucus that might happen later. Okay. And because of that, there could also be some adventitious breath sounds. Okay. Like crackles. So that's quite normal. Okay. Sometimes they could also exhibit asthma. So the breath sound, if there's asthma, would be wheezing. Okay, there could be some restlessness because of hypoxia. Okay, you will also notice that when they breathe, because they are having a hard time, they're using pursed lip breathing. Okay, so pursed PURSED lip LIP breathing. So like this. Okay, so they breathe like that. They also position themselves on orthoptic position. Okay. We could also notice some nasal flaring. The voice could also change because of the obstruction in the airway. Um, they could experience fatigue. They could also experience anorexia because of there is anorexia, so there's weight loss. Okay, and there could also be clubbing of the fingernails. So we all know if there's clubbing on our nails, so it suggests a yes, you're correct. It suggests low oxygen level. Okay, so this is how we see COPD. So that is a collection of the or combination of three diseases. So it could have signs and symptoms of emphysema, signs and symptoms of chronic bronchitis, and asthma. Okay, so for our management, so one of the best thing that we need to do is to advise them to be on bed rest, okay, so that there will be a decrease in the oxygen demand. Next, we could also instruct them to increase oral fluid intake so that we could be able to help liquefying the secretions, especially for chronic bronchitis. And if those people with emphysema have productive cough, so it could help. Next is good oral care, good oral hygiene. Um, we could also look into their diet. So anything that could be easily taken. Okay. Aside from that, for diet, we could also give high caloric diet. Okay, so that they could have energy. They could also have high protein diet to increase and to maintain the integrity of the alveolar walls. Okay, in terms of carbohydrates, it should be low carbohydrates for us to limit the production of carbon dioxide. Um, what else? We could give oxygen therapy, so we can hook them in oxygen. So usually, if we hook patients in oxygen, it's usually around 1 to 3 liters per minute. But basically, it's upon the doctor's order. Okay. We need to tell them to avoid cigarette smoking. We can also do chest physiotherapy. We could do postural drainage, bronchial hygiene, bronchial tapping. Okay. Sometimes we could also do suctioning, especially if there's a lot of secretions that are not really liquefied. Okay. So nebulization will also help. Steam inhalation. Okay. For medications, they could be given expectorants to expel those mucus, those secretions, like guaifenesin. Okay, we could also give mucolytic to liquefy the phlegm. Okay, like carbocysteine, like mucomist. Okay, we could also give antitussive. Okay, antitussive so that they will not cough much, like Sinicod forte. Okay, like dextrometropan, codeine. Okay, so those are some medications that could be given. However, if we're going to give these medications, we need to observe and monitor the patient because sometimes they might experience dizziness and drowsiness. Okay. What else? Avoid using antitussive if the patient has activities to do, because again, antitussive usually causes drowsiness. So it can also cause constipation. So if it happens, tell them to increase oral fluid intake. What else? Since we are giving nebulization, so it means that we could have bronchodilators like salbutamol, like aminophylline, terbutaline. Okay. However, if we're going to give those things, make sure to monitor the heart rate. Okay? Because those medications, those bronchodilators, could result to tachycardia. Okay? Another thing, for medication, we could also give some antihistamine. Okay? What are the common antihistamine that you're taking? Maybe some of you are taking cetirizine, diphenhydramine. Okay? So if that is the case, if you're going to give antihistamine, make sure to watch over your patient because it might cause dizziness and drowsiness. Okay, we need to monitor usually their level of consciousness and to make sure that they are safe. What else? Another group of medication that could be given for patients with COPD are steroids. Steroids could be given for us to promote lung expansion. Okay, and it could also be used as an anti-inflammatory um, effect. We could use the anti-inflammatory effect of steroids. Okay, other medications, we could give antibiotics, okay, like amoxicillin and the others. But again, those things, all of the medications that I was able to mention depends on the doctor's order. Okay, if we're going to give antibiotics, so and it is through IV, make sure to do skin testing. So again, one of the management that I have stated a while ago is we can do suctioning. However, that is only appropriate if the patient has secretions, if we have mucus on them. However, if the case is asthma, wherein what happened is there is an airflow constriction, okay, so suctioning is a no-no. Okay, so do you have any questions, any clarifications, anything in mind? Okay, if none, thank you very much. Hoping that you were able to understand and learn something from our discussion. So with that, enjoy listening, enjoy studying, and thank you very much for staying and for listening. So once again, this is Doc A, and I would like to thank you all for staying with me. God bless.